Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about gathering requirements. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what is the best way to gather/capture requirements? How do you make sure you capture all scenarios? What are the best practices of requirement analysis? Well, I'm not going to say that these are the best ones, but what I usually do is that um, I step through the feature with my stakeholders and my team, depending on who I'm dealing with. You can argue that my team is my stakeholders sometimes as well. So basically what I do is that I follow a step-by-step process where I sit down with the stakeholders, and usually it always starts the same way. You have an open discussion about sort of what you want to do, because there's a lot of ideas flowing. You need something that is a little bit more solid than just talk, but it always starts with a bit of talking because you want the users to start flowing for all the people, ideas and stuff like that. And then after a while you're going to start circulating on what you want to do. And then you know that you've reached that point when people sort of just repeat the same thing over and over, and this is where you should have had a chance to pay attention and ask a few questions and like sort of just rubber duck with people. Then the thing I will do is that I will tell them, all right, can you let me try to write the thing down as I understood what you were saying right now? And usually people are very fine with somebody else taking, writing things down. So I pull up a story card or like some sheet or something like that. I give the story or the thing that we're going to do some type of name, and then I try to describe sort of what we're trying to achieve, and our ideas of how to do this. I try to express it in text, and then I point by point step through what's going to happen. Basically, it's if you've ever worked with something like BDD or Gherkin or something like that, it's a similar approach to that. I usually don't. It depends on the team setup. I mean, if you are running BDD and things like that, you can use scenarios or things like that. But I usually find it much easier to basically just step through all the things that the system is going to have, and basically I outline the things that we want the system to do, and then when I have created step by step like all the things that I can do, if I go to this page, I click this thing and I do that, and I click this thing should happen, this thing should happen, this thing should happen, step by step. And then I go and I add acceptance criteria where I basically say these things should be true when we are done. If they are, the system is basically in a state that we believe is the correct one. The reason why I always put them in after we're done is because those points will be the criteria that we use to evaluate. As if you have QAs, you don't have to have QAs for this. It doesn't matter. It's just a way to say these would be the things that you would go and check to make sure that the feature is working as you intended. And what's nice about that is that can act as reference information for if you do end-to-end testing or unit testing or scenario testing, whatever you're doing, right? These are the things that you're going to use to validate that the feature works, right? And then I send that out as a draft to my stakeholders and my team. I just post, this is how I think about the thing, and then we jump on a call, and then basically we walk through it, and I talk, and I basically go through, and I show a very keen, like I use a lot of imagery when I work with features and scenarios and stuff like that. Like even if I'm not a designer, I use artboards and like visual aids for this, where if I have a interface, for example, I will just draw on the interface using my favorite tool is Sketch for Mac. It's like the best product there is when it comes to this stuff, right? You draw lines, you write some text, and you sort of step through them, or you do it on your screen, you do a screen share or something like that, and you go, my thinking is that we should go here, and then you go here, and you click this, and then this happens, and then that happens. You basically, it's for those of you who've been using event storming, it's very similar to that. You're basically just describing what happens as you talk, because what that will do is that when people listen to you go through the thing that's going to happen step by step, they're going to start having questions, and they're going to start to question you. They're going to say, no, actually I don't think that that's how it should work. It should work that way or this way or that way, and that's what you want, because by just saying step by step what's going to happen. You invite other people to correct you, and that can be, you know, people who don't really understand. It can be, it doesn't matter if it's a stakeholder or another developer, so forth and so forth. It creates that invitation to correct you, which is very powerful. And then when that happens, you listen. I usually start by saying, so this is how I will try to explain from my perspective how this is going to work. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because that is more powerful than asking people to just read through the thing you said and just you've written, and then have them like just say, yeah, that's how it should work. If you try to explain it it's almost like rubber ducking in a sense, like it's a crowd form of that. They will correct you if your interpretation of the words that you're saying and the way that you explain it doesn't sound correctly in their head, right? So it triggers them, as I said. And then you repeat that process. Like you refine, you basically they tell you that something was different. You know, there's a discussion. You might refine the steps. You might change them a little bit, or you might have to like ask them from some time and then rewrite it a little bit. Usually, I do it live with the people that I work with, and then I try to make sure that the story card reflects it once again, step by step. So it basically becomes a checklist of things that should happen and the acceptance criteria for what we will check when we know that it's done, right? And then you repeat that until there is no one else who sort of has anything to say about the story. That in of itself is not perfect. I always add one, I try to remember this, which is very difficult. This is just a tip from me. When you're done, just ask, what will happen if these things, well, if something breaks, if something doesn't work? Classic one is when you're doing like, you know, some type of validation, or like if you, especially UI. Designers, as an example, they're usually extremely good at creating UIs, or if it's system design or whatever, but no one ever provides artboards for the error case. What happens if, you know, the input is incorrect? What happens if you know, something goes wrong? So you start asking a few questions about what happens if I input the wrong thing. What should happen if I take too much text? What error should we show if the network fails? You start trying to question, you know, almost like a QA would ask, what will you do if this thing broke? What would you do if this thing broke? Because that usually, it's like the last little shake of the requirements, because most people always think about the positive cases, but it's very rare that they think about the error cases. But save that for afterwards, usually, in my opinion at the very least, because you want the happy cases and feature requirements out as much as possible before you think about the error cases, because usually when you get to the end state of knowing how the feature works, that's the appropriate time to start asking about the errors. Because if you start too early, you will start talking about error cases for a feature that might not, for requirements that might change, because you haven't spoken about the requirements in enough detail yet. So what I want you to take away from this is that I suggest that if you want to capture requirements, start by having an open discussion with the people that you're going to be involved in, because usually people need a little bit of talking just to get their sort of ideas flowing, so they get some mental picture. That's usually never enough, because that people are very good at putting things in their head. They're very difficult. It's very difficult for them to explain it. So then you take on the quote-unquote risk, or you put yourself out there and say, all right, I'm going to write this down, and I'll send you a message, or I'll like show you what I wrote, and then you will tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm right about my interpretation of this. You write a description and you step by step explain how everything's going to work, and using screenshots or like short videos or something like that to sort of illustrate how you want it to work, so you get a good description, is very key here. And then you write a checklist. This is what's going to happen when you do this. You sort of try to describe the feature flow as the user is interacting, or as the system is doing its thing, right? And then you outline the acceptance criteria as just a bullet list of things that are true and that you will check when you are in the done state. And then you show that to your stakeholders, and you walk them through step by step how you think about this. It's basically rubber ducking with a developer on code, where you try to explain step by step what the code is supposed to do in your head. You do the same thing with the feature, and then they start correcting you. You refine, you update, and you do this until you don't get interrupted anymore, or no one triggers doesn't trigger a conversation when you say out loud. It's very important that you say out loud what these steps mean to you, because that is the thing that usually people hook on to, instead of just asking them, does this look correct? And then finally, when nobody is correcting you, try to remember to start from your own perspective and ask, what happens if we do that and that breaks? What happens if the network fails? What happens if the input fails? Start asking about the error cases, because most people forget about that. And if you do that, you'll usually shake out a few extra things that you missed in the specification. Have a great day.